folks. Look what we have here. This is actually the disassembled portion of a NVIDIA Tesla model P40. And so the reason I'm putting this together is because, well, when trying to run this thing, if being a bit older with the HMB server, throughput and all that, it gets pretty hot. So opening it up, you can kind of see why. So the folks that put this together in the first place, I mean, I'm sure it looked a lot different then, but you can see now it's the degradation of thermal paste, kind of the misplacement of some of the patches. So I'm trying to put it together now so it can be better at transitioning heat into the heat sink. So I've got here is a thermal pad, which I'll cut into pieces and kind of cover over these bits, and to kind of show you the other side of it and why this is where it is. This is the actual inside of the card itself, and you can see here I've actually already applied a little bit of thermal paste here before I had the idea to throw a camera on it. But here you can kind of see the bottom plate here, the card itself. So there's a metal plate, and here is the actual, kind of reminds you of the CPU. You build computers right there in the middle with the paste on it, which then when put together connects to the other side here and allows the dissipation of heat across this copper element and then through these fins here, the heat sinks. So I'm not a professional at putting this kind of stuff together, but at the same time it's fairly intuitive when you look at it. You see parts that come in contact with each other, you see a degraded piece or a missing piece, or maybe a piece like this one, which was on the other side and then fell off. Then either put it back or replace it, which is why I have this pad. So I'm going to go through this and, feel free to comment, throw me any feedback. Maybe I'm doing this all wrong, and no worries, I'm not going to fire it up right after. Definitely want to see how it all reassembles and feels too. So I'm actually getting this material. This is actually an NVMe heatsink from Amazon. This is something I'm not getting use out of because of the motherboard itself actually had this material on the other side of the mounting where the NVMe's installed. So with these being extra and honestly for $2-3 wasn't worth returning them, who knows the future use. So I'm finding that out right now. So to start with, I want to line this up here to kind of get an idea of where things go. And you can kind of see here, this padding here is going to be cooling this area, but notice here there's a few rectangular bits that extend out that don't have corresponding heat pads on the opposite side, so that's a good place to focus on coverage. And throw it out there if you know, but if you put some of this padding somewhere where perhaps it doesn't belong, or if it overlaps into an area that's not in contact, I don't imagine that's going to be problematic, but it doesn't hurt to know things. So I'm going to put this here. I'm going to cut a few squares as well. Shouldn't say squares, anything square about that. They're barely even rectangles. And I also have a padding down here, anti-static, so you don't want to risk jolting that sensitive equipment. Alright, so I see here a definite spot for some coverage. And so when I apply it, there's no science to this that I know of. I guess I'm going to try to put it on this side here. It's the adhesive, I suppose, or lack thereof, properties of the material seem to prefer flat and smooth surfaces. So I don't know if anyone here uses these workstation cards. This is one of two of them I picked up. I just couldn't say no to a discount, and this is one of them. The other one being a Radeon Instinct, an AMD Radeon Instinct MI60 card with 32 gigabytes of HMDR, HMDR RAM and VRAM, and that thing is quite a beast at handling large workloads. However, it's a bit difficult to get it running outside of a native Linux environment, so that's another story. Alright, let's see. This here. There we go. That one's still pretty solid there. It's just a little adjustment sometimes could do just fine rather than full replacement. And obviously, intuitively, again, you don't want to use this padding material to break the contact point between the thermal paste on these two sides. You know, it's kind of like leaving the plastic on your motherboard, your CPU, or your cooler before you put it all together. It just, no good comes of that. Alright, so here it seems like slide this over a bit. And again, this is not something that I'm going to break down as such a science, because quite frankly, that's a science I don't know. I just know that if there's two pieces touching each other with a lot of temperature, and the objective is to cool it, and these participate in that process and facilitate it, then I can deduce that I should probably put those where they aren't, and where they likely either once were or should have been. There we go. I haven't tried yet. This stuff's hard to rip. Got a small triangle here. I'll do another one where I go through this same process with the Radeon Instinct MI60, because that's an interesting case, because when you check the temperatures during a run session, you'll notice that there's quite a variance between the GPU temperature point. Like if you're at HW Info or say AIDA64, you'll be able to see that there's this hot spot, and I caught that, you know, clogging up to over 100 Celsius. Of course, at that point you need to shut it down. You don't want to cause damage to your GPU. So it looks all right. I mean, as far as pieces touching each other, I'm sure there's a perfectionist or two in this world who could make art out of this. But as far as I'm concerned, I just want to see the components with them, namely the thermal paste I applied, which is actually a tube I had not used left over from Thermalright, which I got a air cooler with a nice little USB mounted CPU and GPU temp and percentage indicator. So with extra paste, I figured you'd get some good use here. So I'm going to start putting this back together. Now, yes, it's one of those things, you know, being delicate is just goes without saying, but at the same time, these are pretty robust cards. They're meant for server use. So this is kind of how it goes here. So you put this, basically the back plate underneath, and you line up these screw holes. So basically what you'll see here, you kind of look through it there, see the light, try to get them as close as you can. I have the screws over here. And similar to the mounting of thermal coolers on your CPU, they also have these kind of spring-loaded, there's 4 of them that hit each corner here. So I put those on when I'm on the back side. So I'm going to take this delicately as I can. This is where it all comes together or falls apart. See, I can tell it's trying to do something. So I'm going to leave this down here and put this on first, because this actually feels like when the screws come out of the entire assembly, it ends up making it a bit, I want to say, maybe loose or disjointed, I suppose. Here we go. Lining up, and yeah, you can feel pretty good contact there. I'm going to start here, so it's without messing around with it too much. These four holes here that have a bit of, call it a little scintillating circular pattern around it. These require these spring-loaded screws that, of course, provide back pressure when you're applying it to kind of let you know when you've gone far enough. Take this screwdriver here. It's a little Phillips head. I'm sure there's a gauge and a torque spec too, but in my experience, you get it nice and you just kind of feel it when you take it apart, and you get a pretty good idea. So I'll start this one. So see, it springs in and locks down. So now we know that thermal paste is also going to be smushed in and spread out around the rest of the chip. So it should permit better heat dissipation as well. Of course, we'll find all that out when we give it a run. And there we go. I kind of follow the old rule that you might remember when you're changing a tire. The star pattern, if you will, or the crosshatch pattern. Basically, you do the corners rather than doing it in a, say, a roundabout way, so that way you don't maybe lopsidedly tighten the car down too much. And there we go. A little torque, but I don't want to put so much elbow grease into it. I hear something crack, it's, like I said, it's robust servo, but very material, but at the same time, it's not like woodworking or changing things in your car. Got a different touch, if you will. Alright, there we go. And last one. I'm presuming these springs are not going to fly off, but I haven't studied them as a standalone, so be careful, make sure they go in well. Put it back together the way it was. And you kind of feel it crank down now, and here it is. You feel that point there where if you go further, you're really putting elbow grease into it, and more likely than not, you'll strip something out, or worse, you could crack the card. So the purpose of this, just get it nice and snug to where you feel basically it's almost like a parabolic curve of tension as you feel it tighten. Now I'm at much more ease with these four back in, because I'm confident that the main components that comprise the GPU itself are back inside and assembled. The rest is basically putting in these tiny screws, and I gotta be honest, I don't have the hands for this, so I really rely quite a bit on the magnetic ends of my tools, which even then those are hit and miss depending on which one I grab. So, and again, I try to start at the outside and work my way in, so that way I don't leave any gaping hole between one part or another. And I don't have to torque it all the way, just get it nice and snug. I mean, I'm not gonna try to guess the inch pounds or Newton meters here, but I'd say give or take from feel maybe 5 to 10 inch pounds, but I would definitely not take my word on that, and definitely look that up. Especially if the work you're doing is for something more than just tinkering with an old card to get it running on your mobile workstation. And this card, just throwing it out there, is 24 gigabytes of VRAM from the NVIDIA's Pascal architecture, which I think just preceded the Ampere. So the more commonly known, the 3090 and 3090 Ti being kind of the flagship of the turn of the decade around 2020. Prior to that was Pascal. I think the difference being perhaps ray tracing, or not ray, or some shaders or something like that. I'm not an expert on that side of it, but this is definitely this is definitely a solid workstation card, and certainly in its day, it would have cost quite a bit more than what you can find these for on, I don't know where you shop, Newegg, Amazon Business, hopefully maybe your local Micro Center, or you can even go to Servers Direct, things like that. You might pick up a pretty solid deal on these old cards, like say, Dell, Lenovo, and the other big, as you call them, the big wigs in the game. When they decide that they want the next new and best thing, they pretty much offload this stuff like yesterday's trash. So of course the distributors don't see it that way, and the price point reflects it. I thought about getting one of those, I've seen them used quite a bit. Basically it's a screwdriver that is a delicate one, where you kind of give it a squeeze and you get your, so it screws like this installed without issue, and solid Torx. But just over the years, I trust the feel of the hand. I've just been doing it for such a long time, whether it be this or anything else. And you've used a screwdriver for so many years, you just kind of have the instinct to say, well, that's about tight enough. And not to say that's fail-proof. Alright. Kind of broke my own rule here. I was going to do that corner, but I can only imagine how exciting this part must be. There we go. Let's do about 3 more. I looked into these too, as far as the Pascal cars from the Tesla age. These P40, they also have a P100. I haven't really dug into that much. Of course, price point's significantly higher. I think even on a good day in the aftermarket, you could get one of those for under $3,500. You know somebody or bid right, but this particular one I found on Amazon Business. Actually, of course, I think they all say it's the last one, but it's about $299. So, considering if you're doing dollar per VRAM or whatever your calculation might be, and architecture notwithstanding, it's a pretty solid deal. Now that's presuming you can get it up and running, of course, relying on the digging up of old NVIDIA toolkits and CUDA architecture, so your dependencies are able to, well, first recognize the card in your system, so, and then run it. And that's another issue too. A lot of system BIOS aren't really configured to pick up on some of these old ones, so I'm actually going to try it out, give it a run in my AMD Threadripper 5955WX, which I've installed actually now into a Asus WRX80E Sage Wi-Fi board, so it's quite a beast system, so hopefully I'll be able to handle this work. But there you go, looks all buttoned up to me. What do y'all think? There it is, the Tesla P40, now with what I would hope to find to be better cooling negotiation and improved heat transfer. And so another good idea, this last thought before I jump off here, is these screw holes are pre-drilled, presumably to put a server fan in there, maybe a 40-60 millimeter at high RPM, and that's something that I'm looking into as well. I have a couple of these little fans, but as far as the mounting and adaptation, that's something I'm still looking into. And the other thing you'll notice is I pulled the bracket off the card, which would typically have it properly seated into the PCI slot, but if I'm running it in this position, and I can basically secure it other ways without having to use all that, I'm not concerned about any significant wobble. So it locks in place, and of course the server fan holds it there as well. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it. And if nothing else, I hope you all learning something I did. I don't typically take these apart, so we'll see how it performs, and I'll try to get some footage or some screen video of this thing running some AI models or some stable diffusions. See how it does. Appreciate it.